He hadn't barked in nearly a year, not once, not even when coyotes came close, but on a cold October night, under the pine trees of Black Hollow. Ranger let out a single, broken bark that shattered the silence. Clint Harper rushed outside, and what he found near the edge of the barn wasn't just disturbing. It was the beginning of a buried truth, one that would uncover his wife's disappearance, expose a forgotten evil, and remind everyone watching that sometimes it's the dog who refuses to forget what humans tried to bury. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The sky over Black Hollow, North Carolina, had taken on that low, leaden gray of late autumn, when the wind bit through your jacket and the trees rattled like bones. Morning mist curled like smoke through the naked branches of the forest that bordered Clint Harper's ranch, and the air carried the faint tang of wood smoke and distant rain. The ranch, once lively with cattle and the sound of porch radio, had been silent for a year now, eerily so, except for the occasional creak of the windmill and the soft patter of paws. Clint Harper, 59, stood on the porch with a chipped ceramic mug in his weathered hands. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered but starting to bend with time. His hair mostly silver now, and his face marked by the deep grooves of loss. A scar curved along his left jaw, a souvenir from his FBI days. But it was the sadness in his eyes that truly aged him. Since the day his wife, Jenna, vanished, Clint had left the bureau, sold half the livestock, and let the land grow quiet. He only trusted two things now: silence and his dog. Ranger lay at the edge of the porch, unmoving, his golden-brown coat speckled with dew. He was a German shepherd, nearly 8 years old, with a square, noble face and ears that rarely drooped. A retired rescue dog. Ranger had served beside Clint in mountain SAR missions for years, responding to cries buried in snow or rubble. He was loyal to the marrow, and lately, deeply unsettled. For the third night in a row, Ranger had refused his food and spent hours staring into the distance beyond the fence, his gaze locked on the dilapidated barn at the edge of the property. The barn hadn't been used in years, not since Jenna disappeared. No animals were housed there, no tools had been moved, but something about it now pulled Ranger like gravity. He wouldn't bark, he wouldn't move, just watched. Clint squinted across the fog-choked field toward the structure. The barn sagged under its own weight, its tin roof peeling like sunburnt skin. The wind nudged the doors open and closed in slow, breathy motions. He took a sip of lukewarm coffee and sighed. Maybe the dog was getting old. Maybe they both were. He walked down the porch steps, boots thudding on the soft earth. Ranger didn't turn his head. That, more than anything, made Clint stop. Ranger had always acknowledged him, always, even when half asleep, even when injured. "What's the matter with you, buddy?" Clint muttered, kneeling beside the dog. He ran a hand through Ranger's thick coat. It was damp from the morning dew. The dog flinched slightly, but his eyes never left the barn. The sky darkened through the afternoon, clouds rolling in like bruises. By dusk, thunder had begun to rumble low across the hills, and a light rain began to spit on the roof. Clint lit a kerosene lamp in the kitchen and sat by the window with a cold can of stew, watching Ranger from behind the glass. The dog had not moved since morning. He hadn't eaten, he hadn't slept. When the lightning finally cracked across the sky, it lit the trees like twisted veins, and that's when Clint heard it. The bark, not a normal bark, a deep, guttural, almost painful sound that came tearing from Ranger's throat like it had been trapped there. It wasn't just alert, it was urgent. Clint dropped his spoon. Outside. Ranger was no longer on the porch. He was racing across the field, splashing through puddles toward the barn with a speed Clint hadn't seen in over a year. Clint was already grabbing his flashlight and pulling on his boots. He chased the dog through the mud, rain pelting his face as he crossed the yard. Ranger, he called. But the dog didn't stop. The barn doors creaked open with the wind as Clint approached. He expected Ranger to be sniffing around hay or sniffing rodents, but instead, the dog was pawing furiously at the side of the barn, just to the left of the main door, at a spot where the foundation met the soil. Hey, stop, what are you doing? Clint called, slipping inside behind him. Ranger was whining now, a high-pitched, broken sound as he scratched at the ground. Dirt was already flung across the floor. Beneath his paws was a section of wooden slats, slightly newer than the surrounding boards. A trapdoor Clint hadn't remembered ever installing anything there. He dropped to one knee, brushing Ranger aside. The soil here was damp. Loose. He pressed his fingers into the seam and felt something move. A hinge. He opened the slats. Below, a narrow, earthen shaft yawned into darkness. It wasn't a proper cellar, more like a root chamber or hideaway, dug hastily. Clint lifted the flashlight, angling it down. The beam caught only dirt walls and a pile of torn canvas at the bottom. He couldn't make out more. But then he saw them, clear in the mud beside the opening. Footprints. They weren't his. They weren't recent either. But they hadn't been there months ago. His pulse ticked faster. He looked at Ranger. "You've been trying to tell me something," he whispered. "This isn't just instinct, this is something else." He stood slowly, the rain turning heavier outside, and looked back at the dark mouth of the shaft. Something about it reeked of wrongness. The same feeling he had the night Jenna disappeared and he found her car abandoned but unlocked near the old bridge. Keys still in the ignition. She wouldn't have just walked off. He stared into the barn's shadows, into the old dust and rot, then down at the tracks, half washed away by rain, but still visible. The dog knew. Ranger sat beside him, breathing hard, eyes unblinking, and Clint Harper. For the first time in a year, felt something shift in his gut, a whisper of doubt, a trace of fear, and the sharp scent of truth finally clawing its way toward the surface. The next morning came wrapped in a stillness that felt unnatural. The storm had passed, but the sky remained bruised and low, and the air was thick with moisture clinging to every blade of grass. Clint Harper rose before dawn, the night's discovery still heavy in his chest like unspoken words. He hadn't slept much. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the wind had kept him alert. Ranger hadn't moved from his post by the barn, his ears twitching at every sound. Clint walked across the dewy yard with a spade slung over his shoulder. He passed the trapdoor Ranger had uncovered but didn't open it. Not yet. His gut told him there was something else. Something near that patch of earth Ranger had been obsessed with before he even noticed the hidden shaft. He approached a darker section of soil near the barn's foundation, where the grass grew sparse and the dirt had the color of old blood. He drove the spade into the ground. The earth gave way too easily, 3 feet down. The metal edge of the shovel struck something solid. Clint knelt and clawed at the dirt with his bare hands until he uncovered a wooden box, roughly the size of a toolbox but older, sealed with rusted hinges and bound in leather straps. The wood creaked as he opened it. Inside, wrapped in mildewed cloth, were papers, folders stamped with faded bureau markings, clippings from old newspaper articles, photographs, and at the bottom, a plastic evidence sleeve containing a photo. He pulled it out with shaking fingers. It was Jenna. Her hair was longer, darker than before, her eyes wide, as if caught off guard, and a timestamp scrawled across the bottom dated only 11 months ago. Clint's breath caught in his throat. He knew that look. It wasn't just fear, it was recognition. She was looking at the camera like she knew who was behind it. Behind the photo, on a yellowed index card, were 5 words written in red ink. She's alive. Not for long. Clint gritted his teeth. His hands trembled, rage simmering beneath his skin. He flipped through the papers and found something more chilling. Files on other missing persons. Some of them from years ago, some recent. Many women. One name in particular made his eyes narrow. George Dunn. Missing 18 months ago. Last seen at Black Hollow County Records. He knew that name. Clint grabbed the box, tucked the photo of Jenna into his jacket pocket, and started walking toward the northern edge of town, toward the little white schoolhouse that doubled as the temporary library. Cassie Dunn was shelving books when he arrived. She was in her early 30s, with auburn hair tied messily back, freckles scattered across pale skin, and green eyes that seemed to carry more weight than a woman her age should. She wore a knitted cardigan, sleeves rolled up, and denim jeans dusted with chalk from the schoolroom's ancient blackboard. Cassie was quiet, polite to townsfolk, but always distant, as if her mind were never fully in the room. Clint had seen her around, usually with her daughter, but they'd never spoken more than a hello. He didn't knock, just stepped inside with Ranger at his side. "Miss Dunn," Clint said quietly. She turned quickly, startled, but her expression softened when she saw the dog. "Mr. Harper," she said, brushing her hands on her jeans. "Is everything all right? Depends on what you know about your father." Her eyes narrowed. "I know he didn't just disappear," she said, "and I know the sheriff stopped looking after 3 weeks." Clint nodded. "I found something, a file, had his name in it, along with several others." He set the box down on the nearest table. Cassie stepped closer cautiously, eyeing the folders like they might explode. "My wife is in there too." Cassie picked up the first document, hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. Then she froze. Inside was a wrinkled page torn from a leather notebook. Her father's handwriting. She would know it anywhere. He had been an investigator, assigned to Black Hollow after a string of unsolved disappearances. Cassie remembered the long nights when he would spread files across their dinner table, muttering to himself, connecting dots others refused to see. He was meticulous, brave, and had taught her to always ask why. "Do you remember what he was working on before he vanished?" Clint asked. Cassie didn't answer right away. She was scanning the handwritten notes, lips moving silently. Finally, she looked up. He was following a pattern. Disappearances that happened within a 10-mile radius of this town over a span of 15 years. Women, mostly alone. All of them last seen near abandoned properties. Clint leaned forward. "Do you know anything about a silver necklace?" Cassie nodded slowly. "My dad mentioned one in his last voicemail, said it was the key. He called it the trigger. I thought he was being metaphorical." Clint reached into the box again and pulled out a plastic bag containing a blurred photo of a woman's neck, partially concealed by her hair. But just visible was a silver chain and a teardrop-shaped pendant. The quality was poor, but Clint recognized Jenna's collarbone. He'd kissed that exact curve countless times. Cassie's eyes widened. That's it. They stood in silence for a moment, the old floor creaking beneath them. Ranger let out a low whine and lay down beside the table, his head on his paws, watching the door. "You said your wife's name is Jenna Cassie?" finally asked. Clint nodded. My father mentioned a woman, J.H. Those were the initials in his last entry. Said she knew more than she let on. That she tried to go to the press before she vanished. She was a reporter before she married me, Clint said quietly. She kept digging long after I told her to stop. Cassie gave a sad smile. Sounds familiar. Clint looked at the open file, and then at the woman across from him. I don't think this town is just unlucky. I think someone's covering up something. Cassie didn't hesitate. I agree. The rain had started again outside. Soft at first. Clint turned toward the window, watching the droplets trail down the glass. There was a quiet rage building inside him, not just grief anymore, but a sharp, focused purpose. Jenna was alive, somewhere, and someone in Black Hollow knew exactly where. The cold returned with force the following morning, the kind that crept into the bones and lingered in the corners of every room. Clint Harper stepped into his late wife's old storage shed behind the house, a forgotten place layered in dust and shadows. The wooden floor groaned beneath his boots as Ranger padded behind him. Ears perked, nose twitching. The morning sun cast narrow beams through the broken slats in the walls. But the space remained dim and heavy with silence. Clint hadn't stepped foot in this shed since Jenna disappeared. He had told himself it was just storage, holiday boxes, unused tools, her writing desk with half-finished articles still pinned to the board. But now, with the photograph of Jenna still in his pocket and the box of hidden evidence burned into memory, he realized the truth might have been closer than he wanted to believe. Ranger moved ahead of him, nose pressed to the ground. He stopped near a canvas-covered pile in the corner and let out a low whine. Clint approached and pulled the sheet aside. Beneath it was an old army green field jacket. Jenna's. She'd taken it everywhere, especially on her weekend hikes. Clint froze. The jacket shouldn't have been here. She was wearing it the day she vanished. He lifted it gently, his fingers brushing over the faded seams. The fabric was stiff, as if it had been damp and dried poorly. Then he saw it, a dark, reddish stain on the inner collar, crusted but unmistakable. Blood. Ranger sniffed it, then looked up at him, ears pinned back. Clint stepped back, breathing through his teeth. Why would this be here? The question didn't echo long before Ranger's nose dropped again. The dog circled the writing desk, pawed once at the floor, then slipped into the narrow crawl space beneath the wooden table legs. When he emerged, he carried something in his mouth, something small and glinting silver in the low light. It was a necklace. The chain was thin but sturdy, tarnished with time and soil. Hanging from it was a teardrop pendant with a floral engraving. Jenna's. Clint's knees gave slightly as he reached for it. His thumb rubbed over the ridges of the design. It was the last gift he gave her on their 10th anniversary. The pendant popped open with a soft click. Inside, a tiny photograph rested behind a glass circle. The two of them on their wedding day. Jenna's smile in that picture was wide, unguarded. Nothing like the woman in the photo he found yesterday. Eyes wide and haunted. He stood motionless, memories flooding in, her laughter echoing in this very shed, her fingers brushing his shoulder while she sorted files, her voice whispering theories late at night. Clint turned and strode back toward the house. Ranger followed silently, tail low. Cassie met him halfway up the porch, her daughter Lila clutching a book behind her. Eyes wide but curious. Cassie looked tired, dark circles beneath her eyes. Hair pinned back messily again, but focused. Clint held out the necklace and the jacket. These were in the shed. Cassie took the jacket, examining the collar. That's blood, she confirmed grimly. Fresh within the last few months. It couldn't have been there long, or the mice would have shredded it. Clint nodded. She was there. Cassie's voice dropped. I've seen this necklace before. Clint blinked. What Cassie pulled her phone from her pocket and scrolled through a folder of old family photos. She stopped at one and turned the screen. It was a photo of her father, George Dunn, standing outside the Black Hollow courthouse. Behind him, almost out of frame, was a woman with long brown hair walking past, and around her neck the same teardrop pendant. She followed him. Cassie whispered she was tracking the same people. That's why she disappeared. Clint glanced down at Ranger, who was now sniffing the porch's far corner. The dog's ears suddenly went rigid, and he let out a low growl. Clint followed his gaze toward the tree line at the far end of the property. Something had moved. Stay here, Clint said quickly to Cassie. He stepped off the porch and followed Ranger into the trees. The forest was quiet but not empty. Ranger pulled slightly ahead, tail stiff, nose locked on a scent trail. They passed old fence posts and a rusted gate before Ranger stopped at a thicket of undergrowth and barked. Clint pushed past the branches and found a discarded piece of cloth tangled in the brush, thick flannel, stained at the cuff. He picked it up and froze when he noticed a small leather patch sewn into the seam. G. Miles stitched in block letters. Gerald Miles. Clint knew the name, though only in passing. Gerald was a recluse who lived at the edge of the eastern bluff, in a cabin surrounded by hunting traps and barbed wire. Mid-60s, tall and wiry. Gray hair worn long beneath a ball cap. Usually seen muttering to himself in the supply store. Some said he was a Vietnam vet. Others claimed he had once been a bounty hunter in Texas. Either way, Gerald didn't like company, and certainly didn't like questions. Clint returned to the house, cloth in hand. Cassie's eyes widened when she saw the tag. Gerald Miles, she said. My dad mentioned him once in a note. Said he was a loose thread in a tapestry of shadows. Clint raised an eyebrow. That's poetic. Cassie shrugged. Dad was dramatic. But why would Gerald's shirt end up near my barn? Cassie bit her lip. Maybe he was watching. Maybe he left something, or maybe he took something. Clint pocketed the cloth. Time to pay him a visit. Cassie hesitated. You sure that's wise? He's not exactly stable. Neither am I, Clint said, his voice cold. Ranger barked once, short and sharp, as if in agreement. The woods behind Gerald Miles' cabin were dense and old. The kind where silence wasn't peaceful, it was oppressive. Clint Harper crouched beneath a cluster of pine branches, eyes fixed on the ramshackle cabin 30 yards ahead. Its metal roof sagged in the middle. One window was covered with plywood, and a stack of firewood leaned haphazardly beside the porch. Ranger lay low beside him, perfectly still, save for the slow flick of his tail and his nose twitching every few seconds. Cassie Dunn had gone in alone 20 minutes earlier. She insisted she could handle it, just a few photos. A quick check near the shed, and then back. But now she wasn't answering the radio. She should have been back. Clint muttered, his voice tense. He stood. We're going in. Ranger was already ahead of him, weaving silently between tree trunks, his dark coat almost blending with the undergrowth. Clint followed with quick, measured steps, keeping to the shadows until they reached the back of the cabin. A second door, half rotted, padlock dangling open, creaked slightly in the wind. Clint's hand went to the grip of his sidearm. He pushed the door open, inside. The air was damp and stale, thick with the smell of mold and something else, something metallic and burnt. The cabin was dim, lit only by a shaft of gray light slicing through a gap in the roof. Then he saw her. Cassie was slumped in a wooden chair at the center of the room, wrists bound to the arms with nylon rope. Her hair hung in loose strands over her face, and blood trickled from a cut at her temple. Her eyes blinked open slowly as Clint rushed to her side. "Cassie," he whispered, crouching. "I've got you, from somewhere in the cabin." A latch clicked. Clint froze. Ranger growled low, ears pinned. A hidden panel behind the fireplace groaned open, revealing a set of wooden stairs descending into darkness. Cold air drifted up from below, damp, electric. Clint looked down the stairwell, flashlight in hand. "Stay with her," he whispered to Ranger. He descended slowly. The narrow stairs led to a small concrete chamber. Fluorescent lights flickered on, casting a harsh glare over the space. A metal shelf lined one wall, stacked with black VHS tapes labeled only with dates and initials. A rusted desk stood in the corner, covered in water-damaged folders. In the center of the room was a cot chained at two corners to bolts in the floor. On the wall above it, a photograph hung by a rusted nail. It was Jenna. She looked thinner, hair matted, a bruise on one cheek, but it was her, and it was recent. Clint's hand trembled as he reached for one of the tapes. The label read JH 915. He didn't get to play it. A loud slam echoed above, the cabin door. He raced up the stairs. Gerald Miles stood in the doorway, tall and narrow as a post, face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. His clothes were stained, boots coated in dried mud. In his left hand was a crowbar. In his right, a matchbox. "Should have stayed out of this." "Harper," he said quietly. "You dug too deep." He struck a match. Clint lunged, but Gerald tossed the match into the pile of old wood near the fireplace and kicked the door shut behind him. The padlock snapped into place with a chilling finality. Fire roared to life almost instantly, feeding on the dry rot. Smoke began to pour through the cracks in the floorboards. "Get her out," Clint shouted, turning to Ranger. The dog barked once, then sprang into motion. He grabbed the rope at Cassie's wrist and tugged hard until it snapped. Clint tore the second binding loose and hoisted her up. She coughed violently, smoke already choking the air. The back window, small, square, barely wide enough, was their only way out. Clint smashed it open with the butt of his flashlight. "Go, Ranger," he commanded. The dog leapt through first. Clint lifted Cassie and shoved her through, coughing hard as flames licked up the walls. He dove out last, landing hard on his shoulder in the wet grass. Behind them, the cabin crackled, the flames climbing toward the roof like eager fingers. Gerald was nowhere in sight. Cassie gasped for air, shaking. Clint grabbed her hand and held it tightly. "She was here," he said, voice rough with smoke. Jenna was here, and Ranger, standing firm despite the burns along his flank, let out a single bark, not in fear, not in warning, in defiance. The air was sharp with pine and gunpowder as Clint Harper moved through the woods with practiced focus. Ranger padded silently at his side, ears trained, nose twitching every few feet. The dawn light filtered through the trees in cold ribbons, catching on the moisture that clung to the undergrowth. Behind them, Cassie kept pace, her camera gear slung over one shoulder, a makeshift bandage still wrapped around her temple from the night before. They were hunting a ghost, but this ghost bled. Gerald Miles hadn't vanished when the fire consumed his cabin. He had slipped into the forest like he was born from it. And now, with one bullet fired and nothing else left to lose, he was desperate. Clint knew the look of a man on the run. The deeper the forest, the more erratic his tracks had become. Blood spots on moss, broken branches, a discarded water bottle tucked behind a rock. They followed the trail into a steep ravine thick with thorn bushes. It was there, in the shadow of a split boulder. That ranger froze. His whole body stiffened. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Then came a voice, hoarse, brittle. "Don't come any closer." Gerald stood just beyond the clearing. Clothes torn, one leg soaked in blood. He held a revolver low, pointed at the ground. But his finger twitched on the trigger. "You torched my life," he hissed, voice barely carrying. "You don't know what they'll do now." Clint raised his hands. "We know enough. Enough to end it." Gerald's eyes darted to Ranger, then to Cassie. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks, thin, pale, and fevered. "I was just supposed to watch," he said. "Move people from one place to the next. No questions, no names." "Where's Jenna?" Clint asked. Gerald's lip trembled. "They moved her last month, northeast, into the hills, near an old timber cabin off Highway 13. That's all I know, I swear." He didn't lower the gun, but he didn't raise it either. Ranger took a step forward. Gerald's hand shook, and the weapon slipped from his grip, clattering onto the stone. He fell to his knees. "They'll kill me now." "No," Clint said, striding forward. "You're going to jail. And for the first time, you'll have to see what you've done." By midday, local sheriff's deputies had arrived and taken Gerald into custody. The evidence Clint and Cassie had pulled from the underground chamber, photos, tapes, physical restraints, had already triggered an emergency task force from Raleigh. The name Jenna Harper was now part of a broader investigation, and at the top of that list sat a location: an old logging road 60 miles northeast, marked on one of Gerald's discarded maps. The drive was long and winding, the road barely paved and overgrown in places. Cassie sat in the back seat of the truck, scribbling into a notepad. She'd already spoken to a regional reporter, leaked a few photos anonymously, and begun writing what she called a reckoning. Ranger lay across the back seat beside her, resting his head on her knee. His left flank was still healing from the night before, but the burn was shallow. He hadn't made a sound since they left town, alert, but strangely calm. Clint gripped the steering wheel tightly. His face was unreadable. The cabin appeared just after a bend in the road, nestled in a hollow beneath a ridge. It was small, built from rough timber, roof patched with rusted metal sheets. There were no signs of life, no smoke, no vehicle, no sound. Clint killed the engine. "I'll go first," he said. He approached the porch slowly, Ranger close behind him. Cassie stayed back, phone in hand, already dialing 911 just in case. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was cold, dry, and heavy with dust. There were canned goods on a shelf, a cot in the corner, a table covered in medical supplies, and in the far room, barely lit through a slit in the wooden shutters, someone sat on the floor, wrapped in a wool blanket. Jenna Clint's voice cracked. She turned. Hair longer now, face pale, eyes rimmed in red, but unmistakably her. Jenna Harper. She blinked once, then again. "Clint," she whispered. Her voice was rough, like it hadn't been used in weeks. He crossed the room in seconds, dropped to his knees, and wrapped his arms around her. She clung to him as if the ground might fall away behind him. Ranger let out a sound, not a bark, not a growl, a whimper of recognition. Jenna's hand found his fur. "You found me," she said, crying softly. "You found me." 2 days later, back in town, the authorities had everything they needed. Gerald's confession led to 5 more arrests across 3 counties. The tapes were verified. The names matched. The network was exposed. Cassie's article, Beneath the Pines. The truth. Black Hollow tried to bury, ran in state newspapers and then national syndicates. Her father's name was cleared. Families who had waited years for answers finally received them. And Ranger stood on the porch of Clint's home, sun warming his coat, ears twitching as the wind rustled the trees. Jenna sat on the steps beside him, leaning against Clint's shoulder, a mug of tea in her hand for the first time in nearly a year. Ranger lifted his head and barked. A single, clear sound that echoed across the hills. Not in fear, not in warning, but in joy, sometimes. The silence we fear most is the space where miracles are quietly forming. Clint lost hope. Cassie lost direction. And Jenna lost her freedom, but it was love, loyalty, and the unspoken faith of a dog that led them back to one another. In a world that often feels dark and uncertain, we are reminded that even what's been buried for months or years can be brought into the light. That justice may take time, but it walks hand in hand with faith. And that sometimes God sends His signs through the most unlikely messengers, a loyal dog's bark, a whisper in the woods, or a photo that refuses to fade. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the people still waiting to be found, the truth still waiting to rise, and the quiet ways God may be working behind the scenes in your own life. Comment Amen if you believe that no matter how long the night, God's light will always find a way through. Don't forget to like, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that restore faith in goodness, in miracles, and in each other. May God bless you and your family, and may you always find the strength to believe, even when the path disappears beneath your feet.